The DNA results sit between them like a loaded gun. Marcus stares at the paper that says he's Sophia's father. Janelle holds the one that says she's not Sophia's mother. 10 years of their daughter's life, built on a hospital's catastrophic mistake. Now 2 families want the same child back. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. Marcus Whitfield stood in the hospital waiting room, his hands trembling as he gripped his phone so tight his knuckles went white. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly institutional glow that makes even healthy people look like they're dying. He could hear his mother-in-law's voice coming through the speaker, sharp and accusatory, asking why he wasn't in the delivery room with his wife. He should have been. God, he should have been there holding Janelle's hand while she brought their daughter into the world. Instead, he was out here making the biggest mistake of his life. The joke had seemed so funny in his head. Dark humor, the kind his college buddies used to crack over beers when they thought they were being edgy. Janelle had texted him a photo of the ultrasound earlier that week, her face glowing with that maternal radiance everyone talks about, and he'd responded with something stupid. Something about how the baby better come out looking like him, or they'd have problems. She'd laughed it off. Or at least he thought she had. Sent back a string of eye-roll emojis and a message saying he was ridiculous. But then his brother Ryan had taken it further during their golf game that morning. Started riffing on it, asking if Marcus had checked the pool boy's schedule, making jokes about DNA tests and paternity leave. Marcus had laughed along because that's what you did with your brother, with your boys. You laughed at inappropriate things and nobody really meant it. Except Ryan pulled out his phone and started recording, said they should make a reaction video for when the baby was born. The kind of thing that went viral on social media, the shocked dad bit, the fake accusation, all in good fun. Marcus had said no. He definitely said no at first. Now he was listening to his wife scream his name through the phone his mother-in-law was holding up to her ear, and he couldn't move. He'd posted it. He'd actually posted the video 20 minutes ago, right before Janelle went into active labor. Him, sitting in his car in the hospital parking lot, talking to the camera about how he was about to find out if this kid was really his, playing it up for the algorithm, using words like suspicious and interesting timing and we'll see what she looks like. His face doing that conspiratorial smirk that he thought made him look funny, but probably just made him look like a complete asshole. 73 people had already viewed it, including apparently several members of Janelle's family. A nurse pushed through the double doors, her expression unreadable behind her surgical mask, and Marcus felt his stomach drop through the floor. This was it. This was the moment where everything either stayed the same or changed forever, and he'd already tipped the scales before the moment even arrived. The baby's cry reached him first, that piercing newborn wail that cuts through everything else. Then the nurse was saying congratulations and asking if he wanted to cut the cord, and Marcus was moving forward even though his legs felt like they were made of concrete. The delivery room smelled like blood and antiseptic, and something else. Something primal that he couldn't name. Janelle was propped up on pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face exhausted and radiant and absolutely furious. She wouldn't look at him. The nurse placed the baby in Janelle's arms, this tiny wrinkled thing with a shock of dark hair and skin that was still that transitional newborn shade, too early to tell anything definitive. Marcus stepped closer, trying to catch his wife's eye, but Janelle turned her whole body away from him, curling around their daughter like a shield. Her mother stood in the corner, arms crossed, radiating the kind of cold fury that made Marcus want to apologize to his future grandchildren. Her sister was there too, phone out, probably documenting everything for the family group chat that Marcus was definitely getting kicked out of. He reached out, wanting to touch the baby's tiny hand, and Janelle flinched. Actually flinched away from him like he was going to hurt them. Something cracked in his chest. Something that felt permanent. The doctor was talking about APGAR scores and measurements. Normal, healthy delivery. But Marcus could barely hear her over the blood rushing in his ears. He'd broken something here. Something that had been whole and good and his. And he'd broken it for a joke. For content. For 73 views from people whose names he couldn't even remember. They named her Sophia, after Janelle's grandmother. Marcus wasn't consulted. He stood there while Janelle filled out the birth certificate paperwork, his name added in the father slot like an afterthought, like something required by law rather than love. When they were finally alone, Janelle nursing Sophia with the kind of natural grace that made his throat tight, he tried to apologize. The words came out wrong, defensive. He hadn't meant it like that. It was just a joke. Couldn't she see it was just a joke? He loved her. He loved Sophia. He would never actually doubt that Sophia was his daughter. The video was supposed to be funny, that was all. Shock humor. Satire. Didn't she understand satire? Janelle looked at him then, really looked at him, and her eyes were so empty it scared him. No anger, no hurt, just nothing. Like she'd already left the marriage in her head and was just waiting for her body to catch up. She asked him one question, her voice barely above a whisper so she wouldn't wake the baby. Did he think, even for 1 second, that she had been unfaithful? Marcus opened his mouth to say, of course not. Never. Not even as a joke. But the word stuck in his throat because if that was true, if he'd never doubted her even for a microsecond, then why had the joke been so easy to make? Why had it rolled off his tongue so smoothly, so naturally, like some part of his brain had already been rehearsing it? The silence stretched between them, filling up with all the things he should have said and didn't. Janelle turned back to Sophia, and Marcus felt himself becoming irrelevant in real time. A secondary character in a story he used to think was his. They went home 3 days later. Janelle's mother stayed with them for 2 weeks, sleeping in the guest room, maintaining a wall of ice between her and Marcus that could have frozen the Atlantic. Every time he tried to help with Sophia, there was someone else already there, already holding her, already proving they were more necessary than him. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning to Sophia crying and find Janelle already in the nursery, rocking their daughter back to sleep, singing softly in the dark. He was redundant. Worse than redundant. He was suspect. The video had gotten more views, 4,000 now. His friends thought it was hilarious. His coworkers had seen it. His boss's wife had sent it to his boss, who'd pulled Marcus aside and suggested he might want to take it down, given the optics. Marcus had tried to explain that it was taken out of context, that he and Janelle had that kind of relationship where they could joke about anything. But even as he said it, he realized he had no idea if that was true anymore. He deleted the video on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in his car in the parking lot at work, but the damage was permanent. Screenshots existed. People had saved it, shared it, commented on it. Strangers on the internet had opinions about his marriage, his wife's fidelity, his daughter's paternity. He'd opened their life up to public speculation for engagement metrics, and there was no taking it back. Janelle stopped wearing her wedding ring 3 weeks after Sophia was born. Marcus noticed when she was washing bottles in the kitchen sink, her left hand bare under the running water. He asked about it that night, trying to keep his voice casual, and she said it was cutting off her circulation from the pregnancy swelling. He wanted to believe her. He chose to believe her. But the ring stayed in her jewelry box even after the swelling went down, even after her body started looking more like itself again. They moved through the house like ghosts, occupying the same space without really connecting. Marcus would reach for her at night, and she'd roll away, exhausted, Sophia needing her in ways he apparently didn't qualify for. He threw himself into being a provider, working longer hours, bringing home bigger paychecks, as if money could patch the hole he'd blown through their foundation. Janelle threw herself into being a mother, documenting every milestone, every smile, every tiny triumph of Sophia's development. Neither of them threw themselves into being a spouse. Sophia's first birthday came and went. The party was at Janelle's parents' house. All her family, barely any of his. Marcus stood at the edge of the backyard with a beer he wasn't drinking, watching his daughter smash her face into a cake while everyone cooed and took pictures. She looked like both of them, and neither of them, the way babies do. Janelle's eyes and smile, his nose maybe. A combination that was uniquely Sophia. Beautiful. Perfect. Undeniably theirs. But the seed had been planted, hadn't it? Not in his mind. He knew Sophia was his, had never actually doubted it. But in everyone else's. He could see it in the way Janelle's uncle looked at him, calculating. In the way his own mother got defensive when someone mentioned how much Sophia looked like Janelle's side of the family. The joke had metastasized into something real, something that lived in the spaces between their words. Years passed. Sophia grew from baby to toddler to little girl. She started preschool, then kindergarten, then elementary. She was brilliant, fierce, funny in ways that made Marcus's chest ache with pride. She had Janelle's determination and his terrible sense of humor, though Janelle never acknowledged that last part. Their marriage existed in a state of perpetual maintenance mode. Not fighting, not divorcing, but not really together either. They were co-parents who shared a bed and a mortgage, and increasingly little else. Marcus convinced himself it was normal. This was just what happened after you had kids. The romance faded, the partnership became transactional. You stayed together for the child. His parents had been like this. Half his friends were like this. It was fine. They were fine. Until Sophia's school called about the family tree project. She was in 4th grade, almost 10 years old, and they needed a picture of both parents for some ancestry assignment. Janelle texted him at work, asking if he had any photos from when they first started dating. He scrolled through his phone, past years of pictures, until he found one from their engagement party. Both of them young and stupid and in love, before he'd ruined everything. He sent it to Janelle and thought nothing of it until he got home that evening. Sophia was at the kitchen table, cutting pictures out and gluing them onto poster board, and Janelle was at the stove making dinner with her shoulders so tense they were practically touching her ears. He asked what was wrong. Janelle didn't turn around, just kept stirring whatever was in the pot, her movements mechanical. Sophia had asked her teacher a question today, she said, about how genetics worked, why some kids looked more like one parent than the other. The teacher, trying to be helpful, had mentioned DNA and inheritance patterns and how you could always tell parentage through science now if there was ever any question. Sophia had apparently announced, very proudly, that her daddy had made a joke about that when she was born, that he'd posted a video wondering if she was really his. The wooden spoon clattered into the pot. Janelle finally turned around, and the look on her face wasn't angry or hurt. It was tired. 10 years tired. A decade of carrying something heavy while pretending it wasn't breaking her back. And now their daughter knew. Their 9-year-old daughter knew that her father had publicly questioned her paternity. Marcus felt the room spin. He'd thought that was buried, dead and gone, killed by time and his desperate attempts to be better, to be present, to be the dad and husband he should have been from the start. But kids heard things, remembered things. Janelle's family had probably never stopped talking about it in corners he couldn't hear, and now Sophia had somehow absorbed it through osmosis. He tried to explain to Sophia that it was a joke, a bad joke from a long time ago, but the words felt hollow even to him. She looked confused, her face scrunched up in that way kids get when adults aren't making sense. "Why would you joke about that?" she asked. "Why would that be funny?" He had no answer that wouldn't make it worse. That night, after Sophia was in bed, Janelle told him she wanted couples therapy. Not as a question or a suggestion, but as an ultimatum. They did this. They actually dealt with the rot that had been eating their marriage from the inside out since the delivery room, or she was done. 10 years she'd been waiting for him to really, truly understand what he'd done. 10 years of him thinking they'd moved past it, while she'd been drowning in it every single day. Marcus agreed immediately, desperately. He'd do anything, go anywhere, talk to anyone. He couldn't lose them. He couldn't lose her, lose Sophia, lose the family he'd been taking for granted while they slowly disintegrated around him. They started therapy that next week with a woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, who had kind eyes and a way of asking questions that made Marcus want to crawl out of his skin. She asked Janelle how she'd felt when she saw that video. Janelle described finding out while she was in labor, her mother shoving a phone in her face between contractions, seeing her husband's face talking about DNA tests while she was literally in the process of pushing his child out of her body. She described the humiliation, the betrayal, the feeling of being reduced to a stereotype, to a punchline, to a vessel whose trustworthiness was apparently up for public debate. She described how every single interaction with their daughter carried a shadow now, a voice in the back of her mind asking if Marcus really believed, deep down, that Sophia was his. If he'd been secretly watching, waiting for some proof of infidelity to emerge. Marcus sat there listening to his wife articulate pain, He'd thought she'd forgiven, or at least forgotten, and realized he'd been living in a fantasy. He'd moved on because it was easy for him to move on. It hadn't been his sexuality, his loyalty, his fundamental nature as a person that had been questioned. He'd gotten to be the funny guy who made a joke, while she'd gotten to be the woman whose husband didn't trust her. Those weren't equivalent experiences. Dr. Okonkwo asked him why he'd made the video. He gave the same answers he'd been giving for a decade. It was a joke. He didn't mean it. He was nervous about becoming a father, and processed it through humor. But the therapist kept pushing, kept circling back, until Marcus finally admitted something he'd never said out loud. He'd been scared. Terrified, actually. Janelle was beautiful, successful, completely out of his league in every measurable way. She could have had anyone, and she'd chosen him, and some paranoid part of his brain had never understood why. The pregnancy had made that insecurity spike because now there was going to be proof, undeniable genetic proof, that he'd won. That this incredible woman had actually chosen to build a life with him. The video had been his fear masquerading as confidence, his doubt dressed up as certainty. Janelle stared at him like he'd just confirmed something she'd suspected for years. That their entire relationship had been built on his insecurity, and he'd tried to turn that into her problem. She asked if he understood that his fear, his need for validation, had traumatized her, had poisoned their daughter's understanding of her own birth story, had stolen from her the joy of becoming a mother because she'd been too busy defending her honor to actually experience it. Yes, Marcus said, and the word barely made it past his throat. Yes, he understood that now. They went to therapy every week. Talked about race and trust and the weight of stereotypes. Talked about how his joke had played into every racist assumption about black women's sexuality, their faithfulness, their worth. Marcus had thought he was above that, immune to racial biases because he loved Janelle, because he'd made a black woman his wife, but Dr. Okonkwo helped him see how that was bullshit. How racism didn't require conscious hatred, how it worked through thoughtless jokes and unconscious assumptions, how he'd weaponized it against the person he claimed to love most. It was brutal. Necessary, but brutal. Some nights Marcus left the sessions feeling like his skin had been peeled off. Janelle left looking lighter, like she'd been carrying concrete in her chest for years, and was finally allowed to set it down. Sophia started therapy too, separate from them, working through her confusion about what she'd learned. The therapist said she was remarkably well-adjusted considering, but warned that this was the kind of thing that could create attachment issues if not handled carefully. Kids needed to trust that their parents' love was unconditional, unquestioned, and Sophia had accidentally discovered that hers had been treated as a hypothesis to prove. They were making progress. Slow, painful progress, but progress. Janelle smiled at him sometimes, real smiles that reached her eyes. They'd started holding hands again during therapy, a small reconnection that felt monumental. Dr. Okonkwo said they were doing the work, both of them, and that was what mattered. Then Sophia got a school project about genetics. She needed to do a family health history, tracking inherited traits and medical conditions through multiple generations. It was supposed to be educational, a way to learn about dominant and recessive genes. Sophia attacked it with characteristic enthusiasm, interviewing grandparents, making charts, getting way more into it than the assignment probably required. She asked Marcus questions about his family history, his dad's heart condition, his mom's diabetes, his grandmother's osteoporosis. She wrote it all down in neat handwriting, color-coding everything. Then she asked about blood types because apparently that was part of tracking genetic inheritance. Marcus told her he was O positive. Janelle was B positive. Sophia nodded, marking it on her chart, then paused. Her teacher had said that blood types followed specific patterns, that if both parents were positive, the kid had to be positive too. She asked what her blood type was. Neither Marcus nor Janelle knew. They'd never needed to check. There'd been no medical emergencies, no transfusions, no reason to find out. It had never mattered until a fourth-grade genetics project made it matter. Sophia wanted to find out. Said she needed it to complete her assignment, to make her family tree accurate. Janelle said they could call the pediatrician, get it from medical records, but Sophia wanted to do it the science way. Wanted to get tested like a real geneticist would. It seemed harmless. A little prick of the finger, a quick test, maybe $20 at the pharmacy. They took her that weekend, the three of them together, turning it into a family outing. Got ice cream after. Let Sophia feel like she was doing important scientific research. The results came back the next day. Sophia was O negative. Marcus didn't understand the significance at first. He was looking at the paper, at the letters and positive and negative signs, and his brain couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. Then Janelle, who'd minored in biology in college, went very, very still beside him. "If both parents are positive," she said, her voice coming from very far away, "then the child has to be positive. That's how the RH factor works. Two positive parents can't make a negative child. It's genetically impossible." The paper slipped from Marcus's fingers. Sophia was in the living room, watching TV, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in the kitchen. Marcus looked at Janelle, and Janelle looked at him. And for the first time in 10 years, they were both thinking the same impossible thing. One of them wasn't Sophia's biological parent. Janelle grabbed her phone with shaking hands, pulling up websites, medical journals, anything that would tell her she was remembering wrong. But every source said the same thing. Two RH-positive parents couldn't produce an RH-negative child. It wasn't a rare mutation or a weird anomaly. It was basic genetic law, as fundamental as gravity. Marcus felt his mind fracturing into possibilities. Switched at birth? Impossible. Janelle had never let Sophia out of her sight in the hospital. His mother-in-law would have murdered anyone who tried to take that baby away. Medical mistake. But they'd just done the test, watched the technician prick Sophia's finger, seen the result develop in real time. There was no mistake, which left one option that made Marcus's entire world invert. He wasn't Sophia's father, but he'd never doubted Janelle. In 10 years of marriage, even with all the poison that video had injected into their relationship, he'd never actually believed she'd been unfaithful. Never. The joke had been just that. A joke, meaningless, based on nothing real. Except now there was proof. Scientific, irrefutable proof that Sophia wasn't biologically his. And if she wasn't his, that meant Janelle had been with someone else right around the time Sophia was conceived. That meant the joke hadn't been a joke at all. That meant he'd been right, accidentally, horribly right, and everyone who'd condemned him, who'd called him racist and paranoid and cruel, had been defending a lie. The vertigo hit him hard. He sat down before his legs gave out. Janelle was crying, quiet tears streaming down her face, and she was saying she didn't understand. She didn't know how this was possible. She'd never been with anyone else. Never. She swore on everything holy. She swore on Sophia's life, and Marcus wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her with every particle of his being. But the paper was right there. The science was right there. And after 10 years of being told his doubt was prejudice, his fear was bigotry, his joke was unforgivable, he was suddenly holding evidence that maybe, just maybe, his instinct had been trying to tell him something true. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Janelle said they needed to do a real DNA test, a paternity test, the kind that would give them absolute certainty about whether Marcus was Sophia's biological father. Part of him didn't want to know, wanted to keep living in the beautiful lie they'd built, where Sophia was theirs, and nothing else mattered. But another part of him, the part that had been carrying guilt for a decade, that had flagellated himself in therapy and apologized 1,000 times and rebuilt his entire understanding of himself, that part needed to know if the guilt had been deserved. They ordered the test online. It arrived in 2 days, a sterile kit with swabs and instructions that felt obscene in their simplicity. This small cardboard box was going to determine whether his entire life had been real or fiction, whether his daughter was his daughter, whether his wife had betrayed him, or if the universe was playing some kind of sick cosmic joke. Sophia asked what they were doing. They told her it was just a follow-up to her school project, a more detailed genetic test. She thought it was cool, didn't question it, just opened her mouth for the swab, and went back to her homework. Her trust was absolute, unshakable. She had no idea her parents were on the verge of collapse. They mailed the samples on a Monday. The lab said results would take 7 to 10 business days. Marcus counted every hour. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the calendar and his phone, waiting for the email that would either confirm his worst fear or prove something even stranger was happening. Janelle moved through the house like a ghost. She'd stopped insisting on her innocence, stopped trying to convince him, and that absence felt like confirmation. Or maybe she was just exhausted. 10 years of being accused, even gently, even in the margins of their relationship, and now this. Maybe she was done defending herself. The email arrived on day 8. Marcus was at work, sitting in a meeting about quarterly projections, when his phone buzzed with the notification. He excused himself, walked to the bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and opened the attachment with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Probability of paternity. 99.9% Marcus Whitfield was Sophia's biological father. He read it 3 times before the words made sense. He was her father. Sophia was his. The blood type thing had to be a mistake, or he'd remembered his own blood type wrong, or some bizarre mutation had occurred, but it didn't matter because the DNA didn't lie. Sophia was his daughter. Genetically, scientifically, undeniably his. He called Janelle from the bathroom stall, his voice breaking as he told her. She was laughing and crying at the same time, relief pouring through the phone line like sunlight. They'd gotten through it. The nightmare was over. They knew the truth now. Had proof. Could finally put this behind them. Marcus drove home early, stopping to get flowers and Sophia's favorite takeout. Tonight, they'd celebrate. They'd tell Sophia the tests confirmed everything was perfect with her genetics project. They'd have a family dinner where everyone smiled and meant it. They'd go to bed holding each other, and tomorrow they'd start fresh. Start clean. Start new. He pulled into the driveway, just as another car was pulling away. A sedan he didn't recognize. Tinted windows. Gone before he could get a good look. He thought nothing of it. Maybe Janelle had ordered something. Had a friend over, whatever. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open, calling out that he was home, that he had good news, that they needed to talk. The flowers were already wilting in his hand from the heat, but he didn't care. Nothing mattered except fixing this, finally fixing this, once and for all. Janelle was sitting at the kitchen table. There was a folder in front of her, manila and official looking. Her face was completely blank, shock painted over every feature, and when she looked up at him, Marcus knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. She slid the folder across the table. Her hand was steady, which was somehow worse than if she'd been shaking. Marcus set down the flowers and the takeout and picked up the folder. Inside was another DNA test. Different company, different format, but the same type of analysis. Except this one wasn't comparing him to Sophia. This one was comparing Janelle to Sophia. Probability of maternity, 0.0%. Janelle was not Sophia's biological mother. Marcus's brain short-circuited. He read the words again, then again, but they wouldn't rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Janelle was Sophia's mother. He'd been there when she was pregnant. He'd seen her belly grow. He'd felt Sophia kick from the inside. He'd watched Janelle push for 3 hours to bring their daughter into the world. You couldn't fake that. You couldn't fake pregnancy and delivery and nursing and every single maternal milestone that had happened over the past 10 years. He looked at Janelle, waiting for an explanation, but she just shook her head. She didn't know. She had no idea. A woman had shown up an hour ago, she said. A woman named Patricia Morrison. She'd introduced herself as a hospital administrator from St. Catherine's, where Sophia was born. She'd had a file, medical records, security footage from 10 years ago that she needed them to see. There had been 2 births that night in adjacent delivery rooms. Janelle delivering a girl at 11:42 p.m. Another couple, the Morrisons, delivering a girl at 11:57 p.m. Both babies healthy, both mothers exhausted, both fathers panicking first-timers. The hospital had been understaffed, the maternity ward overcrowded, and in the chaos of that night, sometime between the births and the first feeding, someone had switched the identification bracelets. Janelle had taken home Patricia Morrison's daughter, and Patricia Morrison had taken home Janelle's daughter. They'd all been raising the wrong children for 10 years. Marcus's vision went dark at the edges. This couldn't be real. This was some kind of elaborate prank or scam or psychological torture. But Janelle was showing him the documentation now, the hospital records, the security footage that showed 2 babies in the nursery, 2 nurses changing bracelets. A moment of confusion that had redirected 4 lives onto completely wrong paths. Sophia wasn't their biological daughter. Their biological daughter was being raised by the Morrisons, a couple they'd never met, in a house they'd never seen, living a life that should have been hers with them. And Sophia, the girl they'd loved and raised and fought over and rebuilt their marriage for, she belonged to someone else. Patricia Morrison wanted to meet them, wanted to discuss what happened next. The hospital was apparently terrified of a lawsuit, willing to offer whatever it took to keep this quiet. But Patricia and her husband, they just wanted to know their daughter, wanted to meet the child they'd been robbed of, who'd been growing up 30 minutes away this entire time while they'd been raising a stranger's baby. They wanted Sophia back. The folder slipped from Marcus's fingers for the second time that week. Somewhere in the house, Sophia was in her room doing homework, completely unaware that her entire existence had just been revealed as a mistake, that she wasn't who anyone thought she was, that the parents fighting to keep her weren't genetically entitled to her at all. And Marcus, who'd made a joke about DNA tests 10 years ago, who'd been crucified for it, and had crucified himself in return, who'd just gotten proof that he was Sophia's father, only to discover that his wife wasn't Sophia's mother. Marcus stood in his kitchen holding wilted flowers and realized that the universe had the most vicious sense of humor imaginable. His joke had been wrong, but also somehow right. His doubt had been both completely unfounded and accidentally prophetic. He'd spent 10 years atoning for a sin that wasn't what he thought it was, and now he was standing in the crater of a truth so strange that no one would ever believe it. Janelle was looking at him with eyes that held the weight of the world. 10 years ago, she'd told him that doubt would destroy them. She'd been right. But the doubt hadn't come from where either of them expected. And now they had to figure out how to tell their daughter that everything she knew about herself was a lie. Marcus couldn't stop staring at the documentation spread across their kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Birth certificates, medical records, genetic profiles that told a story their hearts refused to accept. Somewhere in this city, a little girl with Janelle's DNA was living a life that should have been spent in this house. And Sophia, their Sophia, belonged to people whose names Marcus had only learned an hour ago. The doorbell rang. Marcus knew exactly who was standing on their porch, and opening that door meant letting reality flood in past the last of their defenses. Patricia Morrison looked exactly like someone who'd spent 10 years raising a child who wasn't hers would look. Tired around the eyes but determinedly put together, her hair styled like she needed the armor of normalcy to survive this conversation. Her husband David stood behind her, tall and solid, with the kind of presence that suggested he'd once played football, now gone soft around the middle the way family men do. They looked like good people. That was somehow worse. They settled in the living room, on the couch where Sophia had learned to read. Patricia kept glancing toward the stairs, her whole body oriented toward the sounds coming from Sophia's room, like she could sense her biological daughter through the walls. They had brought their own folder. Inside were pictures of Madison Morrison, 9 years old going on 10, smiling out from dozens of photographs documenting a life that existed in complete parallel to the one they knew. School pictures, birthday parties, ballet recitals, family vacations to places Sophia had never been. The girl had Janelle's face structure, her eyes, something around the mouth that was unmistakably genetic. But she was also completely her own person, shaped by different experiences, different parents, different choices. Patricia told them about Madison, her straight A's, her anxiety about disappointing people, her love of reading, her terrible habit of hiding vegetables under the edge of her plate. She painted a picture of a child who was loved deeply, but who'd grown up in the wrong house. Then Patricia asked about Sophia. Her voice cracked on the name, on this proof that another woman had gotten to name her biological daughter. Janelle moved to sit beside Marcus, and together they told Patricia about Sophia. Her first word had been more, always wanting more stories, more hugs, more time. She was creative and messy, and sometimes too honest. She loved animals, but was allergic to cats. She'd taught herself piano from YouTube videos. She wanted to be a veterinarian, or maybe a detective. With every detail they shared, Patricia's expression grew more hungry and more devastated. This should have been her knowledge, her memories, her daughter's quirks to discover firsthand. David finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. They weren't looking to disrupt anyone's life. They understood both girls had been raised with love, had stable homes. But surely everyone could see the situation couldn't continue as it was. The girls deserved to know the truth. They deserved to know their biological families. Marcus felt Janelle go rigid beside him. They couldn't lose Sophia. It didn't matter what the DNA said. Sophia was theirs. She'd been theirs for 10 years, through every nightmare and scraped knee. Biology was just cells and chemicals. Love was what made someone your child. But even as he thought it, Marcus knew it was selfish. The Morrisons had the same claim, the same love for a child they'd raised. And underneath all of that was the uncomfortable truth that Janelle had carried Madison for 9 months, had brought her into the world. They talked for hours, circling around the impossible question of what to do next. Patricia suggested family therapy, mediated meetings between the girls, a gradual process. David mentioned lawyers, not as a threat, but as a reality. This wasn't something they could solve in a living room with good intentions and hope. Janelle asked the question Marcus had been too afraid to voice. Did the Morrisons want to switch the girls back? Take Sophia to live with them and give Madison to Janelle and Marcus, undoing the mistake? The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She couldn't give Madison back. Madison was her daughter in every way that mattered. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't survive it. And that's when Janelle finally broke. Because she felt exactly the same way about Sophia. They were trapped in a nightmare where doing the right thing meant destroying their own hearts. As Marcus walked the Morrisons to their car, Patricia turned back and said something that would haunt him. She said she understood why Marcus had made that video 10 years ago. When Madison was born, she'd looked at her and thought the baby seemed too dark, too different from what she'd expected. She'd felt guilty for even noticing, pushed that thought down. But it had been there. That flicker of doubt. And now she knew it had been her instincts trying to tell her something true. Sometimes doubt wasn't prejudice. Sometimes it was the brain noticing inconsistencies that the heart wanted to ignore. Marcus watched them drive away and felt his understanding of the past decade completely rearrange itself. His joke hadn't been racist paranoia. It had been his subconscious picking up on something subtly wrong, some dissonance he couldn't articulate but could feel. But being right didn't make him feel any better. If anything, it made everything worse. They agreed to wait 1 week before telling Sophia. 7 days to meet with lawyers and therapists and figure out the beginning of a plan. Those 7 days were the longest of Marcus's life. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, go to Sophia's room, and watch her sleep, trying to memorize every detail of her face in case this was the beginning of losing her. The lawyer was professionally sympathetic and brutally honest. Biologically, the Morrisons had as much claim to Sophia as Marcus and Janelle did. But no judge would easily separate kids from the only parents they'd ever known. The most likely outcome was some kind of shared custody arrangement, both families getting time with both girls. The therapist was less optimistic. She'd seen cases like this before, rare, but not unheard of, and they never ended well. The kids would struggle with identity issues, attachment trauma. The parents would battle resentment and guilt and grief. There was no good solution, only varying degrees of bad. On day 7, they gathered in the Morrisons' living room. Madison sat between her parents, confused. Sophia sat between Marcus and Janelle, picking up on their tension. Patricia started talking, using simple language about hospitals and mistakes and babies who went home with the wrong families. Then Janelle took over, explaining that Sophia had been born on the same night as Madison in the same hospital, and there had been a mix-up. The silence that followed was arctic. Sophia's face cycled through confusion to understanding to horror. She asked if that meant she wasn't theirs anymore, if she had to go live with these strangers. Marcus grabbed her hand, held it tight, and promised her that would never happen. They were still her parents, but she also had biological parents who loved her and wanted to know her. Madison asked if that meant her mom and dad weren't really her mom and dad. If everything she knew about herself was wrong. Both girls started crying. Quiet, devastated tears that came from having your foundation cracked open. They spent an hour with the girls that day, letting them ask questions, letting them cry, letting them be angry. The therapist stepped in, gave the girls tools for processing their feelings, suggested they start with low-pressure interactions, video chats before meeting in person again. Over the next 3 months, they tried. Video calls where the girls would talk about school and hobbies, feeling each other out like opponents. Supervised outings to museums and parks, all 4 parents hovering anxiously. Family dinners that felt like hostage negotiations. Madison was shy around Janelle and Marcus. Sophia was uncomfortable with Patricia and David, especially when Patricia would tear up watching her. The girls got along okay, but there was no natural bonding happening. No magical recognition of biological connection. The lawyers started talking about formal custody arrangements, 50-50 splits, alternating weeks. Marcus and Janelle fought it. They couldn't do that to Sophia. Patricia and David fought just as hard from the opposite side. They had a right to know their biological daughter. One night, during a family dinner, Madison asked Janelle what she'd wanted to name her. Back when she was pregnant, what name had they chosen? Janelle went very still. They'd compromised on a name they both loved. Amara. It meant grace and strength. The girl repeated the name like she was trying it on, asked if she could use it as her middle name, and Sophia asked Patricia what she would have named her biological daughter. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. They'd picked Elena, after David's grandmother. Sophia nodded slowly, said she liked Elena better than Sophia, that maybe she'd been living under the wrong name her whole life. Both girls were starting to see their current lives as mistakes, and Marcus could see where this was heading. It was David who finally said it, 6 months into this nightmare. During a difficult mediation session, he asked why they were all fighting so hard to maintain the mistake. Why not just switch the girls back? The room erupted. Janelle called him a monster. They were past the point where they could all pretend this was going to end happily. That night, Marcus asked Sophia if she could choose. Would she want to stay with him and Janelle or go live with Patricia and David? Sophia looked at him with eyes that held too much understanding for a 10-year-old. She said she'd want to stay with the parents who'd raised her, but she could feel them all waiting for the biology to kick in, and the fact that she didn't feel it made her feel like something was wrong with her. Marcus told her there was nothing wrong with her, that love wasn't a genetic trait, that family was built through years and experience, that she got to decide what family meant. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. If biology really didn't matter, then why had everyone spent 10 years crucifying him for that video? The custody battle officially started 3 weeks later. The judge ordered extensive psychological evaluations. Both girls testified in chambers. The judge's ruling came down 4 months later. Shared custody, but not the split they'd been fighting over. Both girls would remain primarily with the parents who'd raised them, but there would be regular visitation with biological parents, gradually increasing. Family therapy would be mandatory. It was the compromise nobody wanted, but everyone could live with. Sophia stayed with Marcus and Janelle. Madison stayed with Patricia and David. But twice a month, there would be family weekends where everyone came together. The first few family weekends were awkward and painful. They'd rent a big house, all 8 of them under one roof. But slowly, something started to shift. The girls became actual friends, sharing inside jokes. Sophia started calling Patricia P and David Papa D, not replacing her parents but adding to them. Madison started asking Janelle to teach her recipes, to tell her stories about her family history. Marcus started to understand something he should have learned 10 years ago. Family wasn't either or. It wasn't biology versus choice. It was both and, messy and complicated, expanding to fit whatever shape was needed. One night, about 18 months after the truth came out, all 8 of them were sitting around a fire pit. The girls were roasting marshmallows. The adults were drinking wine. Patricia said something Marcus would remember forever. She said she used to think the hospital had stolen her daughter. But watching Sophia now, seeing how confident and funny she was, Patricia realized that maybe Janelle and Marcus had given Sophia something she couldn't have. They'd raised her with a security Patricia might not have managed. And yes, it hurt. But Sophia was thriving, and that had to count for something. Janelle responded quietly that she felt the same about Madison. That the Morrisons had given their biological daughter a stability Janelle wasn't sure she could have provided, especially with Marcus's video hanging over everything. Maybe the mistake had been a gift in disguise. 3 years after the truth came out, Sophia had her 13th birthday. They threw a party together, both families. She looked around at the chaos of all the people who loved her and asked if she could say something. Sophia said she'd been thinking about her birth story, about Marcus's video and the DNA tests and the hospital switch. She said she used to be angry about all of it. But now she realized that if the hospital hadn't made their mistake, she wouldn't exist. Not this version of her anyway. She'd be Elena Morrison instead of Sophia Whitfield, and Elena Morrison might be wonderful, but she wouldn't be her. She said the mistake had given her 4 parents instead of 2, had given her Madison as a friend and kind of sister, had taught her that identity was something you built, not something you were born with. That family was complicated and messy, but also big enough to hold everyone if you let it. Then she looked at Marcus and said she'd forgiven him for the video, not because he'd been right, but because his doubt had led to questions, and the questions had led to truth, and the truth, as awful as it was, had been better than the lie. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. Janelle grabbed his hand. Patricia and David were crying too. The girls looked uncomfortable with all the adult emotion, which was perfectly appropriate for teenagers. Later that night, after the party wound down, Marcus stood in Sophia's room watching her rearrange birthday presents. She'd gotten gifts from both families, a doubling of everything. She was trying to figure out where to put it all, muttering about needing more shelves. He told her he was proud of her, not just for her speech, but for how she'd handled all of this, for being stronger than any of the adults, for figuring out forgiveness and grace while they were all still stumbling around in trauma and grief. Sophia shrugged. That universal teenage gesture. Then she said something that rewrote every assumption Marcus had been carrying. She said she was glad he'd made the video. Yes, it had been hurtful and stupid and kind of racist if she was being honest. But it had also made her parents go to therapy and deal with their problems. It had made him a better dad. And ultimately, it had led to finding out the truth, which meant she now had this weird, extended, complicated family that she actually kind of loved. Sometimes the worst mistakes led to the best outcomes, she said. Not because the mistakes were good, but because how you fixed them mattered more than the fact that you'd made them in the first place. Marcus asked if she'd ever wonder what her life would have been like if she'd grown up as Elena Morrison. Sophia thought about it, then shook her head. She said maybe Elena Morrison would have been a nice life. But Sophia Whitfield was hers. These were her memories, her experiences, her story. And yes, it was weird and messy and born from mistakes, but it was authentically hers. That's when Marcus understood that his daughter had already learned what took him 42 years to figure out. That identity wasn't about where you came from or what your genetics predetermined. It was about who you chose to be with the hand you were dealt. And Sophia had been dealt the weirdest hand imaginable, and she'd turned it into something beautiful anyway. 10 years after making a joke that had shattered his marriage, 5 years after discovering that joke had been accidentally prophetic in the most twisted way possible, Marcus Whitfield stood in his daughter's bedroom and realized that redemption didn't look like he'd imagined. It wasn't about being proven right or wrong. It wasn't about biological certainty or legal custody or any of the things they'd fought over in conference rooms and court chambers. It was about showing up. Every day. For every person who needed you. For your biological daughter and your raised daughter and your wife and your weird extended family that existed because someone had made a terrible mistake 13 years ago. It was about learning that doubt and certainty were both traps. That life was uncertain and messy and full of contradictions, and you didn't get to know the answers before you had to make the choices. It was about understanding that the video had been wrong, but fixing it had been right. That the hospital's mistake had been devastating, but surviving it had made them all bigger people. That his marriage had nearly died but had been resurrected into something stronger and stranger, and more honest than it had ever been before. Janelle appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. They went downstairs, leaving Sophia to her reorganizing, and sat at the kitchen table, where this whole journey had begun with a folder of impossible DNA results. She told him that Madison had asked if she could start calling them Mom and Dad sometimes. Not all the time, not replacing Patricia and David, but sometimes, when it felt right. She wanted permission to claim her biological parents without feeling like she was betraying her raised parents. Marcus asked what Janelle had said. Janelle smiled, tired but genuine. She'd said yes, of course. That Madison could call them whatever felt true. That there was enough love to go around, enough space in everyone's hearts for multiple versions of family. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to Sophia's music drifting down from upstairs, the ordinary sounds of a house that had survived the impossible. Then Marcus said something he'd been thinking about for a while. He said he was grateful for all of it. Not just the good parts, not just the resolution and the hard-won peace, but the whole messy, painful, devastating journey, because it had broken him open in ways he'd needed, had forced him to confront every assumption he'd been carrying about race and trust and what made family real, had taught him that certainty was overrated, and doubt was sometimes honest, and love was complicated enough to hold contradictions without shattering. Janelle reached across the table and took his hand. She said she was grateful too, that their marriage had been rebuilt on honesty instead of assumptions, on work instead of default settings, that they'd learned to actually communicate instead of just existing next to each other, that they'd survived something that should have destroyed them, and had come out the other side more whole than they'd been at the start. It wasn't the story they'd expected. It wasn't the family they'd planned for, but it was real and hard-won and theirs. Upstairs, Sophia called down asking if they wanted to watch a movie. Something funny, she said. She was tired of heavy and serious. She wanted to laugh. Marcus and Janelle looked at each other and smiled. Yes, they called back. They wanted to laugh too. They were ready to laugh. And as they climbed the stairs to join their daughter, Marcus thought about all the choices that had led them here. The video that started everything. The DNA test that revealed everything. The hospital mistake that had shaped everything. The years of therapy and legal battles and painful honesty that had transformed everything. He thought about the white man and the black woman who'd fallen in love without fully understanding what that meant. Who'd built a family without knowing its foundation was accidental. Who'd survived having every certainty stripped away and had chosen, deliberately, to keep loving anyway. He thought about two little girls who'd been switched at birth and had grown into themselves despite the confusion, had claimed their own identities regardless of where biology said they should belong. He thought about four parents who'd learned to share, to compromise, to build something new out of the wreckage of their expectations. And he realized that maybe the DNA test hadn't destroyed his marriage after all. Maybe it had saved it, had forced them to dismantle everything fake and rebuild with only what was real, had taught them that family wasn't about perfection or certainty or even biology. It was about choosing each other, again and again, even when the easy thing would be to walk away. The 99.9% match had confirmed his biological paternity, but it hadn't told him anything about being a father. That had come from 10 years of showing up, from midnight feedings and homework help and teaching Sophia to ride a bike and standing beside her through every storm. The 0% maternal match had shattered Janelle's biological claim, but it hadn't erased her motherhood. That lived in every scraped knee she'd bandaged, every nightmare she'd soothed, every triumph she'd celebrated as if it were her own. And the hospital switch that should have been a tragedy had instead given them all something unexpected. Proof that love was bigger than genetics, that family could be chosen and built and expanded, that mistakes could become gifts if you were brave enough to see them clearly. They gathered on Sophia's bed, all three of them, scrolling through options for what to watch. Sophia was lobbying for some comedy special Marcus knew would be completely inappropriate. Janelle was suggesting a documentary that nobody else wanted to see. Marcus proposed a compromise that satisfied no one, which was how family decisions usually went. Eventually, they'd figure it out. They always did. The DNA test was supposed to prove paternity. Instead, it had proven something bigger. That family wasn't about matching percentages or genetic markers. That trust wasn't about certainty. It was about choosing to believe despite doubt. That love wasn't a destination you reached. It was a practice you committed to, every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And as the opening credits rolled on whatever movie they'd finally agreed on, Marcus looked at his wife and his daughter and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was, and they'd all decided that was okay. That messy and complicated and cobbled together from broken pieces was good enough, was better than good enough, was real, and real was all they'd ever really needed.